over quickly. We will be recording this event, so just keep that in mind. And if you have any concerns about that, please feel free to reach out to us. And just to take a look at the agenda tonight, what we'll be covering. We'll do a quick introduction into our organizations and talk about citizen advocacy, what you all can do from your perspective, and then also take a look at, from the legislator's perspective, what does advocacy look like? We'll have some time for Q&A at the end as well. Also note there is a Q&A function in Google Meet that we request that you all use that to pose any questions throughout the presentation. You all are welcome to do that. It's just that in the corner, in your bottom right-hand corner, you should see a triangle, square, and circle. And if you click on that, you'll see a Q&A option, and you can insert your questions there. And we'll answer those throughout the event and at the end with the Q&A portion. So I'll turn it over to Wahiba to talk a little bit more about NAAWA and what they do.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this training, advocacy training. My name is Wahiba Derwaz, and I'm one of the board members of the National Arab American Women Association, NAAWA. We at NAAWA are so excited to collaborate with the Citizen for Just Policy organization to bring you this timely and important training. Hopefully, by the end of this session, you will have the tools and some skills to that empower you to navigate, the advocacy and activism arena. But first, I would like to talk about NAAWA, the National Arab American Association. It is a grassroots organization that is a platform that serves as a platform to empower, educate, and outreach. NAAWA promotes the cultural heritage and social justice and civil engagement. We also support our community members, and we also connect and collaborate with other organizations for advocacy, for justice, and social justice. So I don't want to go more than that. We are always looking to have new members and new people in our organization. So please consider, joining us and follow us on NAAWA.org and through our email and through, to all the social media that you can see on this slide. So I will turn it out to Maya or to Najee so we can start the training.
I would like just to add one more thing. If some people are joining us and they're not NAAWA members, please just put your email, and Layal will write it down so we can connect with you in future events. Thank you very much. Go ahead, Maya.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Sarah Zaboli. I sit on the board here at Citizens for Just Policy, or CJP for short. A little bit about CJP. We are a 501c4 organization. C4 is focused on social welfare. So notably for us, we're focused on the Arab American community. We are a nonpartisan organization. We really want to stress that. And our mission is to advocate for the Arab American community, as well as educating and mobilizing our community and collaborating with broader Arab American organizations such as NAAWA, so that we can all have a greater impact together. So we're really excited for this training. Again, it's just going to help mobilize the community and build an effective long-term grassroots movement. So we have two presenters today from CJP, Najee Shuman and Maya Alexandra. Najee is our Executive Director. Najee is very passionate about advocacy and his identity as an Arab American. I think that's something that we should all be extremely proud of. Najee has extensive experience in the public sector as a consultant and in leadership. So we're extremely lucky to have him. And Maya is our Director of Government Relations. She got her start in politics mobilizing students on her college campus. Maya has experience working with advocacy organizations, lobbying firms, and is now a legislative assistant at the state level. So we have a lot to learn from Maya. Our website is there for you to check us out. And with that, I will turn it over to Najee to start us off.
I'm sorry, just before we start, Sarah, I'm getting text messages that people are trying to get in, but they're not able to. Nobody's. Can you check that, please?
Sure, yeah, I'll see if we have a admit button.
They might be trying to use the old link, so I can put
Okay, it's successful. They got in.
Yeah,
thank you.
As long as they are using the new link, the latest email that came from Maya, Alexandra, the latest email, that's the good link that they should click on. I know that there were several before.
They're okay now. They're okay now. Thank you.
I also just put the link in the chat if anybody wants to.
Thank you, Maya.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I appreciate the introduction, Sarah, and thanks everyone for bearing with us with some of the technical challenges. We're sorry about it, but things happen. So I'm glad to see that most people have made it, and there's still some people filing in. So I'm going to introduce the what you can do aspect of this training. And before we start, we just want to kind of give a little disclaimer as to what this training is looking to cover. This is not going to be a specific, training is not going to be specific to a particular body of government. We're not looking to specifically run you through how you can advocate with local, state, or federal. It's also not policy related, this training. This is more of an introduction into civics and advocacy. So definitely going to equip you with the tools to go out and to advocate at different levels. But that's certainly not going to be the focus of this particular training. For those of you that might be interested in advocacy that is more at the federal level, facing lawmakers and elected representatives, CJP will probably have a training later this year that's a little bit more in depth that you can sign up for. So just check our links and stay up to date with our events, and you'll know when that's happening. But again, just want to reiterate that this is really just going to be a basic course, but we do hope that we're going to give you guys some good tools to take out of here and to go do some work in your communities. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just contrasting a little bit activism and advocacy. So we're going to talk a little bit about what they are, how they work together, and when to use them. The key thing here is that Citizens for Just Policy is an organization that is focused on advocacy. We don't necessarily engage in activism work, and you'll see what the difference is on the next slide. But they are very complementary to each other. And so what we're going to talk about a little bit is how they differ as kind of two tools in a broader movement. But then what makes them different, and then we're going to hone in on advocacy as we step through these slides. So here we're just looking at a more detailed comparison of the two. So when we think of activism, we're thinking of really direct action. So things like protests or demonstrations, sit-ins, and boycotts. The purpose really here is to raise public awareness, to apply pressure on a public official for change. A good example of that is the Montgomery bus boycott that happened during the Civil Rights Movement. Whereas advocacy is supporting and arguing for a cause. So here you get into some of the more formal activities such as lobbying or advocating for a particular policy change or publishing, for example. So here what you're looking to do is not so much to raise education, but more so to educate, persuade, and building support for a broader cause. So the example we have there is another civil rights instance, but one that resulted in a change in policy. And then just a little bit more on activism. So again, we talked about the direct action. Really the focus here is, systemic change. Some of the tactics that you'll see employed in activism is, what's called shaming and disapproval, which is where you highlight injustices to apply pressure. You'll see coalition building, which is something that you can do on the advocacy side as well. But there you're looking to coordinate your efforts with other activist movements, grassroots mobilization, And then, finally, strong language. So with activism, you're really looking to kind of drum up support. You're looking to energize. You're looking to, be loud and hopefully make a difference. Whereas advocacy, on the other side, is kind of working within the confines of the system. So in our instance, for Citizens for Just Policy, for example, we do a lot of our work facing Congress. So that is the system that we work in, that we look to also raise awareness and education around, but with a specific focus on policy. And what that means is that when we are adopting a position at Citizens for Just Policy that we want to advocate for, some of the tactics that we use are, selling this, which is highlighting the benefits of our position, lobbying, which is where you look to influence public opinion. And this could be something that activism complements. Educational outreach, kind of positioning yourself as a knowledgeable resource, focusing on building relationships within the government, and then finally, remaining detached from the issues that you're working on. So I think this is certainly a challenging one for our community as we work on some of the issues that are affecting us, but remaining detached from the issue and approaching it from a professional standpoint and working at it within the confines of the system and the process are things that are going to kind of lead to success with advocacy. And so now we're going to get into talking about how you can craft your advocacy message. For anybody that might have questions, I think Maya had alluded to how you can use the activities button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. Otherwise, we will have a Q&A session towards the end of this presentation. So either use that functionality or wait for the open Q&A section. But getting back to the slide, sorry. What we're going to focus on now is defining the problem. And this is kind of step one when you are looking to advocate for an issue, is what is the issue that you are looking to address? And specifically, the way that you frame this this issue is very, very important. And so we have some tips here, and we'll kind of walk you through some examples. But one of the first ones that is important is to focus your issue. So if you're looking at a particular issue, what is the lens that you can look at that issue through that is going to garner kind of the most support? And that doesn't necessarily mean looking at different groups associated with your issue. It could be looking at your issue through a historical lens, maybe looking at how this issue was perceived 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It could be looking at how this same issue might affect other communities or other constituents, and trying to draw the line there. So it's very, very important to kind of focus your issue so that you are capturing the broadest level of support. And the analogy that I like to use is think of a telescope versus a microscope. When you're looking to advocate for an issue, you really don't want to be microscope oriented. And what I mean by that is you don't want to find a specific problem and really hone in on it. You want to use the telescope so you can zoom out and look at that problem and how it kind of interacts with different things around it, and use that to build your advocacy message. You should always think of your audience when you frame your message. So here, kind of a good reminder are think of what message you're carrying forward and whether or not it's something that's easy to remember. So in Florida, a few years ago, there was an initiative to get the Florida state government to purchase land and then turn it into state parks to kind of slow down development in some of the protected habitats. So the organizers of that initiative came up with this idea, which was, hey, we're going to have Proposition 1 and 2 on the ballot, and it's going to be for the purchase of state land. And of course, these are going to be state parks. So they came up with the slogan that was 1 + 2 = land for you. And that's what we mean when you say tailor the message, is if this is going to be something that is going to be on a ballot, make sure it's catchy, make sure it's something that people remember, make sure they know what your propositions contain just through the name, right? So lots of things to consider before you even bring your issue to the table. Always consider the response. You should always be prepared to respond to any rebuttals to the position that you're taking. If you're advocating for a position one way, there's probably a good chance that someone is advocating for a position that it goes in the opposite direction. And you really should spend some time doing research so you know what that response will be if you bring it to your lawmaker. And then finally, refining your problem is very important. So if you piece together a problem and you take it towards your lawmaker and you realize that you're not getting any traction, be prepared to refine your problem. And what that means is maybe you just need to change your focus. So maybe it's the same issue, but you're attacking it through a different angle. And then finally, you just need to continuously repeat this process. This isn't a process that you do once and then kind of run with your message throughout your entire advocacy journey. This is something you should consistently revisit. So now we've talked about how to define our problem. Next is how do we start gathering information? And here the big focus is credibility. And this is not just when you're talking to lawmakers, really when you're advocating for anything, any information that you bring forward, you want to be credible. It's really, really easy for your position to be dismissed if you bring forward information that is not credible. So some of the things to keep in mind is always working with the most recent information available. Understand the credentials of your data. So if you are pulling information from a third-party source, understand what that source is. Is this some type of institution that is recognized anywhere? Is it a legitimate media organization, or is it maybe a blog, right? Don't confine your research to a single source. So make sure that you are diversifying the sources that you're using for your issue. Make sure that your sources are unbiased. In terms of determining what is unbiased, unfortunately, this is a conversation that's creeped into subjective territory. So really think about your audience and think about what your audience might deem to be biased or unbiased. And another point that I think can really help establish your credibility is to admit anything unfavorable. So if you are looking to report on something and you're gathering information and you uncover something that might be damaging to your position, that doesn't mean that you should hide that from your lawmaker or whoever you're targeting your advocacy towards. It's actually going to serve to further your credibility if you admit that information and then come up with a response for it. So credibility is not just fact sharing, it's capital that can be earned and spent. And what we mean by that is as you establish relationships with individuals, as you are advocating for issues, your credibility is going to be something that they come to know you by. And that is something that you can spend over time if you have consistently brought them credible resources, and maybe one of your resources that you bring is not credible. And the flip side is as you continue to bring credible resources to your target audience, that is going to further extend your credibility. And so on the topic of gathering information, publicly available resources are a great place to start. So universities are an excellent resource for a lot of information, think tanks and polling, which Maya will talk a little bit about in her presentation, but these are just a few examples of some of the information sources that you can use that are deemed pretty credible. So now we have our problem and we have our information, then it's finding out who can fix your problem. And this oftentimes can be the most challenging part, depending on what level of government you're working for. So if it's a particular city official that you're looking to engage on, something related to a sidewalk, for example, finding out who that official is might be a challenge. But the kind of the checklist that you should go through as you're doing this is what is the governing body with jurisdiction over your issue. So in the case of this sidewalk example that we gave, that might be, the Civic Works agency within your city. And then who are the officials that make the final decision on your issue? So is that the mayor? Is that someone within the city council? Again, these are things that you can research yourself, just call and ask around. And then finally, the timeframes for presenting your issue in terms of deadlines. So with Citizens for Just Policy, a lot of our work being federal facing, we adhere to the congressional calendar. So that means if there is a member recess that is planned, we plan our activities around that. And it's the same thing with any advocacy issue. If there's a particular ballot measure that is coming up in November, well, then I probably don't want to start advocating for my issue in December. I want to make sure I do it before the election, right? So keeping in mind what the time frame is around your issue in terms of just kind of the bureaucratic process, but also kind of if that is relevant to the issue itself. So if it's something that is seasonal, for example, these are all very, very important things that you should keep in mind as you are trying to figure out who to take your problem to. And then once you start working with that individual, it's gathering, start gauging and building support. So the first thing you should do is kind of determine the level of support for an issue you have. So here you can use polling, you can use social media, you can attend town halls. You can also just ask if you're working on a local issue in your neighborhood, you can just ask your neighbors what they think about a particular issue and use that as an opportunity to share your 2 cents. And you might find some allies that way. But it's really, really important to know where the public stands on your issue. And then thinking about arguments that resonate with the public. So going back to that example that we gave with the state of Florida and the campaign that they ran, again, if you can come up with a slogan or something that would really sell across a broad, public sphere, that is something that is just going to make it a lot easier to find allies. And then going back to researching the opposition, you should absolutely anticipate what they're going to say, and you could take some of those same methods that you use to gather information on your issue and apply those to kind of the opposite issues. So go out and look at polling on opposite issues. Who are the think tanks that are putting out opposing stances? What are the things that they're prioritizing? What relationships do they have, right? And obviously this is a very, very deep web of information. So again, kind of reiterating that we're looking to kind of give you the basics. All of these things that we are highlighting here are things that you would have to do within the context of your particular advocacy issue and the particular official or level of government that you're looking to target. And that's kind of brings me to the last point, which is making sure that you're tailoring that message to the audience. So think about who your audience is, think about what resonates with them, and then make sure that that is that your message kind of conveys what is going to be a priority to that individual. And then finally, you get into the fun part, which is persuading the decision maker. And so this is actually probably the most challenging side of advocacy, because now you've gotten all of your information, you've come up with your position, and now you're talking to someone who either doesn't agree with you or hasn't heard of your issue. And so one of the things that you can do, not always the case when a decision maker is in office, but to educate decision makers before they become decision makers. And so what does that mean? Well, if you're running public education campaigns in schools, a lot of those individuals that you might be talking to might be lawmakers in the future, right? So this is a way that you can start to educate your decision makers before they're in a position of making decisions, right? Also just kind of following someone as they kind of work through the different ranks of government, you can start to build relationships with different officials at different levels, and then use that as they kind of move around to your advantage as you've kind of identified someone that you might have a good working relationship with. So when you're looking to work with a decision maker, the first thing you want to do is define what that relationship looks like. And so we talked about, you know, the influencing them before they become a decision maker, which might not always be possible. But one of the things you can ask yourself, is this going to be a short-term relationship or a long-term relationship? Meaning, am I looking for someone to take immediate action on this issue, or is this an issue that I'm going to need some very sustained support on? Maybe this is something that I'm going to want some type of measure that is renewed every single year for a set period of time on. These are all things that are going to help you determine how you're going to engage your decision maker. Whereas if you're dealing with more of a stable concern, such as, you know, environmental protection, but that's a very dynamic issue. It's an ever-changing field. There's emerging technologies all the time that kind of change the landscape. These are things that you really should be familiar with before you start talking to the individual that you're looking to influence. And then knowing and following the chain of command is key. So within any kind of bureaucratic system, there is some type of chain of command. The more information you can get on that, the better. You really want to start with the individual closest to the issue. So as an example, if you are engaging your member of Congress, they might have a particular staffer dedicated to the category of issue that your issue falls under. And that might be the person that you are going to work with initially, well, which is fine, but then use that to kind of work your way up the chain of command to ultimately your member of Congress. And same thing applies if you are advocating within local government as well, just finding out who is closest to your issue and starting with that individual and giving them whatever information you can is helpful before you try to get to some of the higher ranking members. And then one more slide on this, and then we'll give an example. But above all, be respectful when you're engaging decision makers. It is very easy for us to think that everyone should have the same information as us, especially if we're dealing with elected officials, where frankly it's their job to keep track of what is important to their constituents. But we also have to acknowledge that our elected officials, that the people that work for them, that the people that might be making these decisions are indeed human, and so we owe them kind of that respect when we are first engaging them. It's also a great way to tank your credibility to not be respectful. So it's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. And the reason that this is on a slide on its own is because you're oftentimes going to be placed in situations where you might be engaging a decision maker or someone relevant to your issue, and they may say something that might rub you the wrong way. And in that moment, you might think, well, I really want to give this person a piece of my mind. But again, figuring out how you can do that while being respectful is what's really going to resonate. It's what's going to help you kind of establish that relationship and build credibility with the individual. To give you all an example of something that Citizens for Just Policy has confronted is with the current situation in the Middle East. One of the staffers that we were speaking with was asking us why constituents were upset about some of the airdrops that our country was sending to kind of ease some of the humanitarian concerns that were going on in Gaza. And in that moment, it was very hard for me, at least, to maintain my composure and to not be upset and to answer that question. But I took it as an opportunity to hear what this person was saying and understand that they have priorities within their district, and so they might not be as informed on the issue as I am, and that in that moment they were really looking for someone that they could trust to answer their question respectfully. And so I took that opportunity, and that has turned into a pretty fruitful relationship with an individual that I feel like our organization can work with now on a more regular basis. And so even kind of when it is hard, that is, I think, the time that it's most important to be respectful. So again, just wanted to emphasize this point because it is very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you've done all of this, you know, it can shake out one of two ways. You could either succeed in your advocacy efforts, so this is where you win. And so here you really want to preserve victory and learn from defeat is kind of the general theme of these next two slides. So if you did score a victory, say that you put a measure on the ballot and you were able to advocate for it and built up a good coalition and your measure passed. Well, the first point here is don't count your eggs before they hatch. If we're looking at a bill within the US Congress, for example, there is this looming veto process, which Maya will talk about later on, where your bill could pass, but then could be later vetoed. And if there's a similar process that exists at the local level or within the confines of where you're trying to advocate for something, rather, you should be aware of that. And again, make sure that you are not celebrating before that process is also behind you. Always watch the tape. And what we mean by that is kind of review your journey, document and chronicle your journey. So write down what has worked and what didn't work for you. You know, share those winnings with any allies that you've built up. Turn any former opponents into friends. So if you were on one side of the issue and someone else was on the other side of an issue, you know, that is an opportunity at the tail end of it, once the vote is done or once this issue is behind the both of you, to reach out to that individual and to form a relationship, especially if it's someone who was politically active, right? Citizens who are politically engaged are oftentimes make great partners. So good opportunity to look for that on the tail end of your advocacy efforts. And finally, exit with grace. And this goes back to establishing those relationships. If you're able to secure you know, a large legislative victory, don't spend time, you know, rubbing it in your opponent's faces or celebrating loudly. Really kind of think about how your victory is being perceived, specifically how you are being perceived, and don't do anything that's going to sour anybody from wanting to work with you in the future. So don't go up to a lawmaker that maybe didn't support you and say, hey, I told you so, this passed, right? Just some of the basics. Again, just keeping in mind, hey, I might be back here again. I might be advocating for something again in the future. So I really want to make sure that I am not ruining that relationship. And then, you know, there's also the chance that you might lose, which, you know, is very much going to be the case most often when you're first getting started, which is completely fine. But this is kind of why you continue to refine your message, right? So you might have an opportunity to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. So always look for those opportunities. And the way that you do that is by finishing strong. So if you were rallying for a measure on the ballot and it didn't win out, don't tap out the second that the polls start to turn not in your favor. See it through to the end. Watch the whole process go through so that you remain informed on what that process looks like. If you are looking to pass an ordinance, for example, and you know your measure didn't pass and someone else's didn't, you know, get informed on what that looks like, what that process looks like, how is that law codified, right? And kind of remaining relevant and remaining around as these later conversations are going on. Even if you had lost, serves to give you an opportunity to further establish relationships, either with lawmakers or with relevant people in the advocacy space. And finally, we're going to cover nonpartisan advocacy efforts, or sorry, what nonpartisan advocacy means. And this is really important within the context of our organization's Citizens for Just Policy, but it's also something that you might want to consider adopting for your own positions. And nonpartisan advocacy is a very specific brand. It is essentially advocacy that is not tied to, let's just say, an ideology, and is more just kind of a broader approach to an issue. So the benefits of doing advocacy in a nonpartisan fashion is that you are creating progress that is sustainable. So if the only time that I can get something passed in legislature, for example, is when one political party is in control of my state body, well, that's not sustainable, because the second that the other party comes in, of course, they're going to undo everything that I've passed. Whereas if I start to advocate for a broader nonpartisan issue, something that stretches across multiple party lines, that impacts a broader kind of demographic of individuals, I'm more likely to see this sustained even as political turnover occurs because I'm focusing on a nonpartisan issue. I'm not just trying to work with lawmakers on one side of the fence. I'm working with kind of a broad coalition of lawmakers. And it goes into the next point of appealing to that wider audience. The more diverse your stakeholders are, the easier it's going to be for you to make an appeal to lawmakers. And so if you get into the partisan advocacy, which it could be a viable strategy in itself. We're not saying don't ever take a partisan position, but just understand what risks that exposes you to. So the first one is that there's a policy vulnerability. If you are adopting a policy that is tied to a political party, for example, then your policy kind of lives and breathes with that party's reputation on that particular issue. So if that party's stance changes or the public opinion on that party and their stance on that issue changes, that also is going to affect you. There's also this divisiveness. Maya will get into this when she covers U.S. Congress, but certainly at the federal level, there is a lot of divisiveness that you need to be aware of in terms of how the party dynamics play out. That also exists at the state and the local level. And so when you're engaging in partisan advocacy, you're kind of introducing some of that divisiveness and some of the kind of the different sides that exist within the confines of that decision-making organization. So the less political your message is, the better. And sometimes figuring out how to take an issue and turn it into a nonpartisan issue is a whole journey in itself. But generally, a nonpartisan strategy is going to be a winner when you're looking to get involved in advocacy. And so we've talked a lot about what this looks like from in terms of what you can do as an individual. And so we've given you a lot of ideas, hopefully, on how you can craft your message and how you would want to start to build support for your message and build potentially a coalition and start working on your decision makers. I'm just going to leave you all with a couple of examples of this that you can kind of go and research on your own to get some ideas for how different groups have approached this. The first one I like to talk about is related to gas stoves. And so if anyone was following legislation, there was a recent measure on the ballot to ban gas stoves. And the reason for that is because they are actually quite harmful. There's some specific statistics on gas stoves and having them inside your home and the type of chemicals that they emit inside of your home and how harmful they are, and lots of very troubling risk factors associated with gas stoves. And so you would think that it would be a very easy issue to advocate for. Hey, this is a public safety issue. Having a gas stove in your home exposes you to risk. It increases your risk of developing asthma. Very, very cut and dry argument, you would think from the facts are on your side standpoint. This particular advocacy movement was loosely organized, and one of the things that they did not anticipate was kind of this emerging idea within communities that were being made aware of this legislation that, hey, a gas stove was crucial to cooking food a certain way, and it started to turn into a very cultural issue. So this goes back to, hey, they've come up with their message, they've kind of framed the message, they've gauged the support, but maybe they didn't think about what the opposition was going to say. And so now that movement is going back, reframing their message and looking to attack it again. So I'd say within the next 5 or 10 years, you'll continue to see that measure discussed on the ballot. And it'll be interesting to watch how that movement kind of changes their political approach and maybe tie it back to some of the things that you learned in the slides today in terms of how you can refine your problem statement when you don't win your first advocacy battle. And then the other one that I'll give a very brief example was related to the 1+2 = land for you movement in Florida. And so this was a very unlikely coalition that had formed of citizen advocates to address this issue. And really what it was is people just wanted access to state parks, and they didn't like the way that real estate was being developed. And so they really focused in on this idea of state parks and making more publicly available land for individuals, so that anybody who might have an issue with this advocacy issue from the standpoint of, maybe I'm a real estate developer and I don't want something like this to happen because it's going to impact my business, right? Well, if someone were to approach me with this issue and say, the real estate developers are the real issue, I might not be looking to sign on to it. But if they would approach me and say, hey, here's a ballot measure you can get behind that is going to protect our state parks, that is going to make more state land available to you as an individual, then that might be an issue that I might want to put my weight behind. So just a couple of examples that are real use cases that you can go research. And like I said, you can look at a lot of the things that we've talked about today and apply them to their own advocacy strategy, and hopefully it'll help you generate some ideas of your own. And with all this information, you would take this and kind of learn about what your legislator does. And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Maya, who's going to talk a little bit about Congress and what advocacy within Congress looks like.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Najee, for this great introduction into what advocacy looks like from the individual and community standpoint. I'm going to dive a little bit more into the perspective of our decision makers, specifically looking at Congress, but a lot of the principles that I talk about can be applied also at the state and local levels. So definitely keep that in mind. And Najee gave some great examples of real change and effective change that happens at those levels as well. So keep all that in mind when we are talking about this. But to start, I'll kind of just go over the landscape of Congress. So Congress is a bicameral legislature, and basically what that means is there are two chambers or two bodies that are co-equal branches that draft and vote on and pass our laws. So the first one being the Senate, comprised of 100 members, 2 per state. So that's 2 times 50 for the math. They serve 6-year terms, and every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate members are up for re-election, and they represent all residents of the state that they are elected from. So those are their constituents, the residents of the state. The House of Representatives has 435 members who all serve 2-year terms, and they represent specific geographical areas called districts, which is determined by your address. And so those are their constituency is a little bit smaller. So the House and Senate are governed by their own rules and procedures, and generally in the Senate, the minority party tends to have a little bit more power because individual senators have more power, whereas in the House, it's more governed by majority rules. So the majority party tends to have a little more say there. And there are certain theories that kind of, the idea is that your senators and House of Representative members are representing their constituency, and the way that they do that, there are a couple of theories there. There's the trustee theory that when you elect somebody, you trust them to make the best choices on your behalf, and then there's the delegate theory that says when you elect someone, you expect them to act in accordance with what their constituency wants. And I think in reality, we see a kind of a mix of these two theories, because yes, we want our representatives to accurately represent our beliefs, our policies, what we want to see from them. But at the same time, in general, constituencies are not always having an opinion on every single piece of legislation that somebody votes on, or every single piece of policy that comes across their desk. So there is a little bit of trust that goes into your elected official, but there also is a measure of accountability there. So you can see here the partisan breakdowns of the Senate and the House as it stands right now. In the House of Representatives, the leader of the House is the Speaker, who's elected by majority rule. That's Representative Mike Johnson. And you can see there's a very, very slim Republican majority in the House. And in the Senate, there is a Democratic majority, with the presiding officer being the Vice President, currently Vice President Harris, and of course our President, Joe Biden. So you'll see how these majorities kind of come into play as I move through the presentation. But going back to this idea of your representative is representing you as a constituent in your constituency, this is, in an ideal world, how a representative democracy works. But obviously, there are going to be outside influences on Congress aside from the opinion of their constituency or the wants or needs of their constituency. And so throughout the rest of the presentation, I'm going to dive a little bit more into that and how those come into play, specifically when we talk about getting a bill passed through Congress. So at what point do these different factors come into play, and how do they influence decision-making when it comes to passing laws? So I'm going to focus on 4 influences, and we could do a training for each one of these influences. So I will move through it relatively quickly. But again, if you have questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A, and we'll try and get to them. But I'll cover think tanks, advocacy organizations, elections and campaign finance, and also public opinion when it comes to influences on Congress. So to start with think tanks, I know that Najee mentioned this when we're talking about gathering information and using credible sources. This is really where think tanks come into play. Because the reality of the situation is that congressional offices do not have the bandwidth, the money, the staff to hire policy experts in every single field. If you think about how much policy our federal government, governs on, it's just such a large amount in volume. And so to give you an idea, the average member of the House has a staff of 15, which is very small. And they can't be experts on every single issue. So that's why we have think tanks. So they can be nonpartisan, they can be associated with a particular political party, ideology, policy topic, or even the military. And they're usually funded by individual donations, but they also accept government grants. So they do a lot of work for our government. And like advocacy organizations and political parties, they also exist on a spectrum, right? And they have their own level of credibility and reliability. So I've put some examples there so you can see the standards and the different types of think tanks that exist right now. But just keep in mind when you're bringing information and you're bringing data to your representatives, where you're getting that data from has an influence, right? So if you go and talk to a very progressive member of the House of Representatives and you bring to them data from the Heritage Foundation, which is notoriously conservative, they're going to take that with a grain of salt. They might not even listen to you because of that fact, right? They're going to completely shut that out. So keep that in mind as well as you're doing research, and the fact that policy is driven and researched by these think tanks. They have the time, they have the bandwidth, they have the money, they can do that polling and all that nitty gritty work that's really hard for congressional staff to do. So that's the role of think tanks. Moving on to advocacy organizations, that includes Citizens for Just Policy. And again, they usually rally around a specific political, social, or economic cause or issue and represent kind of a narrow or special interest. And so what they do is they help rally public support. So for example, Moms Demand Action might hold a public rally where they bring in hundreds of people and they invite elected officials to come and speak about gun safety or a piece of legislation or a bill that they carried to show public support, gain public support. It's also a great photo op for that member, which we might not like it, but can sometimes be a driving factor or motivator for that representative to get out there and help rally public support for that advocacy organization. They also host educational events and Hill briefings. They lobby their representatives, and they also generate messaging guidelines. I think a common theme you kind of saw through Najee's presentation was how important crafting your message is. And a lot of what these organizations do, in addition to rallying public support, is they gather that information on polling and public opinion, and they craft certain messages to help gain more public support, to show representatives, hey, sign on to this bill. Here are the talking points. Here's the information you need to know about it. Here's how to communicate how this bill helps your constituents, because that can also be a huge motivating factor for a representative to sign on to a bill or to carry a bill. So advocacy organizations play a really critical role in that sense. And then talking about elections and campaign finance, we all know that it's an election year, but there are different types of elections, and your voice and your vote matters in every single one of them on every single level, federal, state, local, they all matter. I will say during election years, members are kind of amped up and they want to really express how well they've done in their position and show their constituents and show their voters that this is what I've done in my seat. This is all the benefits that I've brought to you to gain support for their reelection. So they're unlikely at this time to take any big political risks, and they want to kind of stay in line so they can get that reelection and continue doing their work in their office. And I'll also say another reason why voting is so important is congressional offices and any campaign on any level has access to lots of voter information. They can see likely voters versus unlikely voters. And so it's really important for our community as Arab Americans to show up and show them what our voices are, tell them what we want. And one way you do that is through voting. It's not the only way. And certainly, you know, I talked about think tanks and advocacy organizations or other places we can get involved, but I wanted to emphasize that importance of getting out and voting. So to dive a little bit into the types of elections, right now, what are happening around the different states in our country are primaries. And that's basically when members of the same political party are competing for the nomination of that party. And if they get that nomination, they move on to the general election in November, where they face off against the opposing party if they have an opponent. And so primaries are very, very critical. And I think they're sometimes not as popular or known about or taught about in our schools. So I wanted to take that moment to let you know all know how important they are, because especially in seats and in states where a seat might be safe, meaning that it's likely to be elected by, to be filled by a Democrat or Republican, the primary is really where the choice is happening. Because if it's likely that a Democrat will be elected in November, the primary is your chance to say what type of Democrat you want to be on the ballot. So primaries are super important. There's also midterms, which happen every 2 years on even years. All of the House is up for re-election, and 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. And then obviously there's presidential years that happen every 4 years. We're in a presidential year now. And so again, every election matters. And while we always kind of focus on the presidential election, keep in mind that a lot of states also have local and state elections going on this year. And I know we have participants from all around the country. So make sure to visit vote411.org, which is a nonpartisan voter information website where you can just type in your address and they tell you all the upcoming elections, all the deadlines, registration, early voting, all that good stuff. So definitely check that out. And again, elections, very important. But then moving on to campaign finance, because elections are expensive. Elections are $1 billion industry. As you can see in 2022, the last midterm election, it was spent $8.9 billion on all federal races. And in the last presidential elections, it was $16.4 billion. So where does all this money come from? Yes, I mean, it's definitely not coming from you and me, because I don't have that type of money in my back pocket. So people can make individual contributions to campaign, $5, $10, $50, whatever you have. But really the biggest way that people impact elections is through PACs and super PACs, which are all regulated by the Federal Election Commission, which enforces certain rules and regulations on them. But to talk about PACs, which are political action committees, similar to advocacy organizations, they can rally around a specific interest, an industry or ideological interests or anything like that, to raise and spend money to elect or defeat candidates. And the key point here is that they're able to directly donate to candidates, although there are limits on the type of people that can donate to a PAC, how much they can donate, and how much they can spend how they can spend their money. There's a lot of regulation there. But this is the main way that people fund specific campaigns and specific people. So you can see on the screen right now on this slide, the top PACs and spending in the last midterm elections. And you can also see the partisan breakdown of how much they donated to, the percentage that they donated to Democrats versus Republicans. And you can see that the Association of Realtors and the beer wholesalers and the credit unions, they all had a pretty even Democrat-Republican split. But of course, there are liberal PACs, there are conservative PACs, and there's everything in between. So the Save America PAC is a Republican conservative PAC, donated $3.8 million. And this all is a lot of money. I'm not saying that $4 million isn't a lot of money, but the numbers we saw said $16 billion, $8 billion. So where is the rest of that money coming from? They're coming from super PACs, and which are like PACs on steroids, very, 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 very impactful. So they're also called independent expenditure only committees, because like PACs, they raise and spend money to elect or defeat candidates, but they cannot donate directly to candidates in their campaigns. They spend money independently of that campaign on ads, on leaflets, on educational material, on mailers, to help rally voters and get people out to vote, or to say, hey, don't vote for this person. The thing here, and this is why there's so much money funneling in through PACs, is there are no limits on who can donate or how much they can donate to super PACs. So that's why we see, as of June 5th, which was just, last week, there are about 2,000 groups organized as super PACs that reported a total receipt of $1.4 billion. So that's how much they have in their bank right now. And to date, there's been about 644 million spent on elections, like federal, presidential, all that stuff in 2024. And 405 million of that was spent by super PACs. So they're spending the majority of money in our elections. So it's really important to not only know what they are, but to know how they work, know how to be involved in them, know how to hold them accountable. And campaign finance is something we can talk about for a very long time. So I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it is critical that we know this is also an influencing factor when it comes to elections and decision making. And we'll talk more about that. But to move on to public opinion, I really want to focus on what the perception of public opinion is, because that might be different than the true public opinion, but it's the perception that's really influencing members of Congress and elected officials in general. And members of Congress are balancing competing interests, and public opinion comes into play here because you might go to a member of Congress and say, hey, 90% of Americans believe XYZ. So why aren't you signing on to this bill? Why did you vote no on this bill? They in turn might say, okay, well, maybe 90% of Americans believe that, but of my constituents, only 10% of them support this bill. So I'm not going to sign on to something like that, right? So it's important to draw that distinction, and especially when you're going into members' offices, to think about that. Also, of course, we just talked about campaign finance. So balancing public opinion versus where your money is coming from, because running an election is expensive. And so they're kind of balancing, what do my constituents think versus what do my fundraisers think. Then another thing is drawing the difference between what your constituents want versus what your party wants. So to officially say I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, you have to, of course, adopt their platform. And of course, Republicans and Democrats are not a monolith, and they all have their own ideological, spectrums within their party. But the point of party leadership, and why I included that, the leaders of the House and the Senate, is that they're supposed to rally the other Democrats and the other Republicans in their chamber to present a unified front so they can get things done, because it's governed by majoritarian rule. You need majority to pass a bill. So you need to get your people together. And so sometimes your party might be asking for something different than your constituents. I'll also talk, I saw there was a question earlier that I think I can address slightly here about when people can't agree on the basic facts, how do you kind of approach that, and what are some advice or tips for dealing with that? I will say that empirical evidence, statistics, facts, percentages, whatever numbers you want to present to someone, isn't always what influences or drives public opinion. Public opinion is shaped by stories and current events and personal experiences. So it's important to look at issues from multiple different angles, and not to just rely on facts and evidence, but also to bring principled stances to the table, and to talk about setting standards. So we could really examine and talk about that for a long time, but hopefully that kind of gives you an idea. And as we move throughout the rest of the presentation, we'll see how this all plays together. So how these actually influence decision-making. So we're going to watch a video that they show in most public schools about how a bill becomes a law. So you all can have a basic idea of how this works before we really get into more of the nitty-gritty.
We Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign, and if he signs me then I'll be a law. How I hope and pray that he will, but today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will, but today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill, now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed that little break from my voice and a fun, cute little video. But in all seriousness, I mean, I was educated in public schools here, and that's pretty much the standard of education I got when it comes to how a bill becomes a law. So we'll get more into depth here because obviously a 3-minute video cannot encompass all that is congressional procedure and the legislative process. But I will emphasize that it takes a lot of time and work to pass a bill, and members often introduce the same bill year after year after year, gaining support, improving the bill, waiting for the right political landscape to get it passed, to get it through, to get it across the finish line. So that's why I call it the bill life cycle, because most of the time that's what happens. It gets introduced, it dies, and then it comes back the next year. So just to give you guys an idea, in the last Congress last year, only 7% of the bills, all bills introduced, were signed into law by the president. So it's such a small percentage that actually gets through to the finish line. And so we'll see kind of why that is in the next couple of slides. So this is the general process of what happens to a bill as it moves through both the House and the Senate. Like I said at the beginning, the House and Senate have their own different procedures and rules and stuff. I won't get into the specific differences there. So we'll more talk generally about the process and how the different influences that I talked about come into play here. So the Schoolhouse Rock video talked about, that the bill, before it was even a bill, was an idea. And where does that idea come from? can depend on these influences, right? Like in the video, it can come from constituents. It can come from the fact that, hey, maybe I'm a member that represents a lot of federal employees. Maybe my district has Quantico in it, so I have a lot of federal employees in my district. So I'm probably introducing legislation that would help them in their specific interests. So that's an example there. Obviously, we know the money that goes into some of these campaigns. So maybe they want to introduce a bill that's aligned with the people who are putting money into their campaigns. Maybe they have their own personal experiences from their professional life that give them a certain amount of expertise in a field that they feel they can introduce a bill. So maybe your representative of Congress is a doctor and is introducing legislation about healthcare systems and reforms and things like that. So ideas can come from a lot of different places. And certainly also public opinion and current events drives what types of legislation gets introduced as well. I'll note that, the politics starts even before the bill gets introduced. When you're deciding, should I carry this legislation or not, the politics comes into play. Who's the majority party in power? Right now in the House, for example, it's Republicans, right? So if you're a Democrat, maybe it's not super great for you right now, the prospects of getting your bill passed. It's also important to note that a member's own reputation and stance and public perception is going to influence how likely a bill is to move through the chamber. So, for example, say you have a representative X that has a really bad reputation, is well-known liar, extremist, etc. The bills that person introduced are likely not going to get a lot of movement. Additionally, they're not likely to get a lot or any co-sponsors. And so what a member of Congress does before they even formally introduce a bill is they circulate the language among other members to get co-sponsors. And basically that's the member signing on to the bill saying, I support this idea, I support this bill, I support this language. And it also indicates, of course, that they would vote yes on it should it get to the floor. So it's also a way to show bipartisanship and to show wide coalitions of support across different caucuses and things like that. So in the House, for example, there are different caucuses that represent, legislators with a certain shared interests or shared ideology. And say you are a member of the Squad or the most progressive caucus in the House of Representatives. It's probably very unlikely that someone from the Freedom Caucus, which is the most right-wing caucus in the House, is going to sign on to your legislation, and vice versa. Also, thinking about if you're a moderate member who represents a swing district that could be go either way, red or blue, you're probably not going to sign on to legislation that's on either end of the spectrum. You want to stay in kind of that moderate area. So that's why the person's reputation and their own personal policies are going to influence how many co-sponsors they get, who co-sponsors their bill. At the same time, so once you get your bill introduced, it has to get referred to committee. And I realize that sort of running short on time, so I'm going to move a little bit quicker through this, but again, go back. I want to emphasize the Q&A section, so please use that if you have additional questions. Committee referral, this can also be a partisan politics can come into play here because the people who are doing the referral are, in the majority party. So if you're in the minority, it might kind of suck. But this is a place where a lot of bills die. We saw that in the stats from the previous Congress. So even if your bill does get introduced, even if it does get to committee referral, which can be hard to get to, once it's in committee, it can sit there for the entire Congress and not have any action on it. All the action on bills in the committees are controlled by the committee chair, which is usually the most senior member of the majority party of the people on that committee. And so the committee chair decides when the bills are heard and when they're marked up and things like that. So a committee chair will decide we want to have a hearing on this topic or on this bill. And a motivation for a hearing can be anything, right? We can also see where current events and public opinion come into play here, because if we consider some of the combating anti-Semitism bills that get introduced into Congress every single year, year after year, but they don't always get big public hearings and they don't always make it to the floor. But we've seen with after the October 7th attacks and campus protests and things like that, public events, public opinions that kind of motivated the committee chair to say, hey, we're going to have a hearing on this bill and we're going to move this through really quickly. So that's where public events and public opinion can really have a play here. And keep in mind, the committee chair controls everything. So the committee chair decides who's testifying at the hearing, what questions are going to be asked, what they're going to say, the timing of it, everything. They decide all of that. And at the same time, after a hearing, which is voluntary, they don't have to have a hearing on a bill. It's not required. But it's really helpful if you want to get public support or make some sort of statement. The formal process that's required is markup. And this is where all the members on the committee get together, they debate the bill, they talk about it, they introduce amendments, they vote on amendments. And a bill could be amended so much that it's completely different from how it was introduced to the committee. So committees have so much power. And that's where it ties back to who's introducing the legislation. Members want to introduce legislation on committees that they sit on because they're able to like get support from other members, talk to the committee chair, things like that. So that they can get their bill moving forward. So that's important to keep in mind too. So even after all this happens, hearings, markup, they vote on the bill, they report it favorably, it doesn't die in committee, it gets to the floor, you still have the trouble of getting on the floor calendar. The speaker can decide in the House and the parliamentarian, the Senate decides when a bill is being heard on the calendar, and also talking about the rules for amendment and debate. Usually floor amendments don't really happen that much. In rare occasions, bills can be amended on the floor, but all the amendments usually happen in committee. So again, emphasizing how important committees are. Okay, so it gets to the floor, you introduced it, you got it to committee, you got it through committee, it's on the floor, and now it has to pass by a majority vote. Great, you did it. So now it has to go through the other chamber and go through all of this again. And then you even have more trouble if the House and Senate pass different versions of the bill, either, ping pong it back and forth. Yes, that's an official term. Or you set up a conference committee and get members from both houses together to talk about it. So again, like there is a lot of politics that comes into play here, and obviously a lot of procedural stuff that comes into play here that can prolong this process. So even once the bill is passed the House and Senate in identical form, obviously could face a veto, and it's very, very difficult to override a presidential veto. You need 2/3 of both chambers, which again we saw how slim the majorities are in both the Senate and in the House. So it's very, very difficult to overturn a veto. So that's kind of just a super quick run through. And hopefully you saw how the different influences kind of made an impact on decision making, and why it's so important for our community to be involved at every single level here. And so to talk more about our organization and what we do and how you can get involved, again, like Najee said and Sarah said at the beginning, we're an advocacy organization. So we work with bipartisan members of Congress. We educate them. We meet with them. We submit statements of the record for official hearings. We do, weekly articles with policy analysis and things like that. We also recently held a briefing on Capitol Hill for, I think, over 50 congressional staffers showed up, and we brought 4 frontline workers who traveled with Med Global to Gaza and got a chance to get in front of a lot of people all at once and talk about the issues that are facing our community and what we can do. And so definitely, if you want to stay in touch, please do. The QR code is linked to our donation page. Every single dollar makes a difference. Our briefing was pretty expensive to put on, but I think there was a huge return on investment because we were able to get so many meetings from that and get in front of so many people and get press there and things like that. So every dollar helps. And I sincerely hope that you all gained a lot from this presentation and want to stay in touch with us. And we're always here. Again, we're going to have a short Q&A at the end to answer any additional questions, but this is kind of examples of the work that we've done. And NAAWA also does incredible and amazing work and has so many opportunities to get involved. So I didn't know if Alma or Wahiba wanted to take a second to talk a little bit more about some of these programs, but the QR code is also to their donation page. So please also support NAAWA and the amazing work that they do.
Thank you very much, Maya. I just want to say that we have also with the audience two professional election lawyers. So if anyone has question, I mean, I'm sure they can answer, as well as Maya and Najee. Thank you so much for this great presentation.
Let me emphasize a little bit, and I want to thank Najee, Sarah, and Maya for this wonderful, great presentation. And I would like also to emphasize about NAAWA's work and what we do. We are a nonprofit organization also, and we are a member. We are grassroots organization that is based on membership, and we would love you to join us. Please, follow us on our media and on our website, on our organization, which is NAAWA.org, or at general@NAAWA.org. You have all the information on this slide. And also we had several committees that we would love you if you are interested in joining committees. They are on the website, and we have like the education outreach committee. We have the reach out to your representative committee. You have the youth committee. So please send us an email to NAAWA.com and talk to us, get involved. We do wonderful things, and we try to collaborate with other organizations as well. So I hope to hear from you, and I would like to thank again Sarah, Maya, and Najee for this wonderful organization and presentation, actually. And we go to the Q&A.
Yes, great. So I'm just reading through the questions right now. I think Najee can answer some of these. If
yeah, I can just kind of go through from the top, and then in terms of will we be sharing the presentation? Yes, anybody who had registered will receive a copy of the presentation as well as a link to the recording itself. I see there's a question here around a power map. And I don't know that I know what that is, so I would answer that no, at least it's not something that we would have developed. But I'm not sure if that addressed the question. And then there was another question here that was around. I'll read the question and kind of give our answer. The question is: not too long ago, Arab Americans were invited to speak with certain members of the administration about issues occurring in Palestine, but many considered. And some did, not taking the meeting out of principle. And the question is, what do you think about taking action like that on principle? I think, if we think about the conversation and rather the training that we just had, you really have to ask, what is being gained by taking the meeting versus declining the meeting. I can't speak to the specific meeting that you're referring to, because I think there was a lot of instances of that happening within our community. I will say that when the Biden campaign reached out to the Arab Americans in Michigan, I think they were right not to take that meeting because it was campaign personnel and not policy personnel. And I think that is what largely our community is asking for is, hey, if you care about us and you want our votes, then, we would like to see policy changes. So I would say that you really have to kind of make that determination when the invitation is presented to you based on who is being sent by the administration. But, even if it is a political tokenization, then there still is a question that needs to be asked about, is this something that makes sense? So hard question to answer, but
yeah, I don't think there's a catch-all kind of formula we can use to say yes or no to these types of meetings or requests. But I will say that and I think Najee kind of touch a lot on this throughout his presentation, is that it's also important to think about your goal and how your actions are being received. Are you being perceived as bitter, or are you being perceived as a champion or somebody that's principled? And at the same time, I mean, how much, like, what kind of conversation are you generating and encouraging throughout this? So there's no perfect answer, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer either. But hopefully throughout through this presentation, you kind of got the feeling that we need to be attacking this at all angles in our community. You know, we're strong and we add a lot to the culture and the workforce and the education and so much to this country. And we need to make sure that our voices are heard. And so there's a lot of different ways to go about that. So
there was one other question, sorry, Maya, that was around, and you did answer a little bit of this. It was when people cannot agree on basic facts, some general tips to deal with that. I just wanted to call back to the telescope and microscope analogy that I offered up earlier. Typically, if you are presenting an issue and there are some facts around it that are in dispute, generally it might mean that you're looking at the issue too narrowly through the microscope and kind of broaden it and try to look for ways that same issue might affect people differently. If the facts are in dispute, you have to look for that middle ground. But it really is, it's similar to Maya's previous answer. There is no one size fits all answer. But to give you one example that we had kind of drawn from in the presentation is in the state of Georgia, a lot of their utilities are done through a single company that is subsidized by the state of Georgia. And Georgian residents wanted to, there was all these studies conducted, and it said that residents of Georgia, this particular district in Georgia at least, were prime candidates for solar power because of the geographical landscape and all that stuff. And what these residents found is that because of some regulation that was in place, they could not purchase solar panels themselves. They had to purchase them through their utility provider. And of course, that came with higher prices and frankly, a monopoly. And so what had happened is there was a strong coalition that was built and eventually overturned this law. But the way that it was built is it was actually started by someone who was a Tea Party libertarian whose main priority was free market and protecting the free market. And then they were able to pull in a lot of, let's just say more progressive and liberal citizens who were more worried about kind of the environmental impact of, making solar less accessible to residents in the district. So they took this issue that was impacting them personally, and they looked at it from the free market lens, but then also there's this environmental protection lens, and they were able to find a broad kind of unlikely coalition that they were able to put together to tackle the issue. So again, just to reiterate, just think about how you're focusing your issue. If your focus is very narrow, it's going to be very hard to convince someone who is not accepting of your facts that this is an issue that they should care about or that they want to engage you. So zoom out a little bit, look for a broader issue you can tackle, and you might find that that person who couldn't agree with you might end up becoming your ally.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have a question for both of you. Well, as an Arab American community, now, is it in your mission or in your horizon to form a PAC for Arab American in the near future? And if so, have you done anything toward that goal?
I think it's certainly it's a necessary thing for the Arab American advocacy movement. So
of course,
I think our stance at Citizens for Just Policy, it being a relatively newer group, we really came together to try to plug any holes in the movement and work with the existing groups. That's where the collaboration comes in. So okay. I think it's very, very necessary for us to have a national PAC, I think, representing Arab Americans, and that's certainly something that we would want to be involved in, and will, take tangible steps towards. It might not be squarely owned by CJP, which is fine, but I think, yeah, we're definitely part of this training, and part of what we aim to do is just to build our broader advocacy capacity as a collective. And that's certainly a necessary step, as we learned from the presentation, the importance of PACs and politics. So
maybe we can give people a chance to fill out the survey now, since we're just wrapping up. We just ask that everyone take just a couple of minutes to give us any feedback on this presentation, what you liked, what you didn't like. It'll all be anonymous, and I promise our feelings won't be hurt. we always are looking to improve and provide the information that you all want to hear about. So if you all could just take a couple of minutes to fill this out, we would be very, very grateful. And so we'll just leave some time to do that.
Yeah, I think you, I mean, you have the ability at this point. I mean, you're so knowledgeable about the issue that to organize a kind of Arab American PAC by reaching to many other organizations, and definitely NAAWA would like to have part of it too. So are you, I mean, are other organizations aware of your work so far, or not yet spread, you know?
Yeah, we've worked with a lot of some of the existing organizations, as well as kind of the broader, there's a broader coalition that we've plugged into specifically to talk about the issue in the Middle East right now. But I think we're still relatively young, I would say. So we've worked with a lot of organizations, and I think our major focus is legislative advocacy. So developing, expanding on the relationships we've developed with members of Congress is a kind of our big focus, and then helping, again, contributing to that broad movement is where we'll kind of get into maybe some PAC work or some other things.
Thank you.
I'd see a new question is, what issues is CJP focusing on when engaging in bipartisan advocacy, and what actions have been taken that you're able to discuss beyond the organized meeting and briefing? Well, I think our issues that we're focusing on right now are related to, of course, what's happening in the Middle East, and the other thing is I'd say the domestic Arab American agenda that the Arab American Institute has put out. That is an advocacy agenda that we, as an organization, have endorsed. And I think from our standpoint, we really respect a group like the Arab American Institute that does a lot of, on-the-ground polling and research within our communities. We talk about credible information sources, and they've really kind of positioned themselves as a very credible information source, not just on Arab Americans, but just on Arabs overall and kind of the Arab sentiment towards America. So for us, we've adopted their advocacy agenda. In terms of the specific work we've done from a bipartisan standpoint, is we've met with and established relationships with both members from both sides of both the Republicans and Democratic members, rather, I should say, and we'll continue to do so. Activities like the briefing, activities like our healthcare coalition letter, and trainings like these, anything that kind of gets our name out there helps us to further those relationships. So those are all kind of key tools to, like I said, establishing those relationships. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but we'll continue to kind of work on, again, reaching out to members from a bipartisan standpoint and making sure that we are connecting with as many offices as possible to advocate for the issues that our community cares about. So
if I can also just kind of jump in here and hopefully answer a little more this question. I think part of building the relationships is also the staff members trust us to kind of tell us how it is, right? And be honest about the landscape that they're dealing with, especially when it comes to this issue, because we see a lot of exceptions being made. And so part of what we're doing through having these meetings and building these relationships is getting a clearer picture of what the political landscape is when it comes to this issue, because it is different when we're comparing to other foreign policy or domestic issues. And so that's a huge advantage of us being a nonpartisan organization and taking the time and effort to work with members from a bipartisan standpoint. And it also helps us to problem solve and put forth policies that hopefully members and staff take up and adopt to move us forward. And also at the same time being a consistent voice for reflecting the Arab American community and experience on the Hill. And I think that's also very important. We've seen amazing, consistent activism, and we're hoping to be a part of the consistent advocacy that's happening. So hopefully that gives you a better idea or understanding of what we do as well, and kind of what we see in the long term.
Just a couple of other I think 2 more questions came in, so I'll just try to answer them really quick. One is, are folks able to volunteer with CJP on advocacy on the Hill virtually or in person? Yes, if that's something you're interested in, please contact us. I think we mentioned at the beginning that this particular training was a very high level view, but hopefully you got a little bit of a taste into how convoluted Congress can be at the federal level. And so we'll have another training that is going to be more focused on a lot of the same things that we talked about, but within the context of, okay, how do you do this at the federal level by engaging your elected officials? And so that's something that we will be rolling out later on, and then as well as doing some type of Hill days with people in our community, certainly another thing that's on our radar. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out and just keep an eye on our website, because we'll post updates on that there as well.
Okay.
I also put our information in the chat there if you want to stay in touch, or if you have any additional questions. And I think the last slide is just NAAWA and CJP's social media.
I think that'll be a good one to keep it here so people can just get all the websites and all the social media, and they can, can connect with both of the organization. So we can keep in touch and bring this wonderful, great, very informative and important training that you have been doing. And I salute you for a job well done, wonderful presentation. And they know how to reach you and to reach NAAWA as well.
Thank you so much.
Very helpful. Thank you so much. Wish you good luck, and we'll be glad to be part of it too.
Oh, we'll keep you guys updated on
Absolutely.
everything.
Please, we will love to work with you again. It has been a wonderful collaboration and work. Thank you, Maya, Najee,
I hope you
Sarah,
all have a wonderful evening.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Wahiba, for organizing this. You did a great job.
Thank you very much. Okay. Have a wonderful evening, all. Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Bye-bye.